They were sure you would come back first, sure you would send the long message, ask for one more chance, explain yourself again, and hand them the proof that they still had power over your heart. They expected movement. They expected noise. They expected you to break under the weight of their distance. But then something happened that they never prepared for. You went quiet, not to punish, not to perform. You simply stopped feeding the silence with your pain. And that is when the ground began to move beneath them. Because when the person who always reached out suddenly becomes still, the whole pattern starts to shake. The one who kept stepping back is forced to face a terrifying thought. What if you are no longer waiting? What if your silence is not anger, but release? Stay here, because this is where everything changes. What looks calm on the outside can create a storm inside the person who thought your attention would always be available. And once that storm starts, they cannot control it the old way. They can delay a reply, they can avoid a conversation, they can act detached, but they cannot easily escape the feeling that something important has shifted. Watch closely, because what silence reveals is often stronger than anything words could ever say. An avoidant person often depends on a pattern so familiar they barely notice it. They create some distance, and the other person moves closer. They go quiet, and the other person tries harder. They pull away, and someone follows, carrying the emotion for both people. This rhythm gives them comfort. It lets them feel important without asking them to fully open up. It gives them space while still proving that they matter. So when you stop chasing, it does more than create absence. It interrupts the machine. Suddenly there is no message arriving to restore the pattern, no emotional offering waiting at their door, no effort from you to hold everything together. At first, this does not feel peaceful to them. It feels strange. It feels like losing a map they used without realizing it. They were used to reading themselves through your reactions. Your texts told them they still had a place in your world. Your effort reminded them that the connection was still alive, even if they gave very little back. But silence removes that mirror, and without it, they are left with uncertainty. Where do they stand now? What do they mean to you now? Why is the usual reassurance gone? That is when the first crack appears, not always dramatic, often quiet, but very real. This is where discomfort begins to rise. Avoidant people are often skilled at lowering emotional intensity by creating space. Distance helps them manage what feels too heavy. It gives them room to breathe, room to think, room to hide. But your silence removes the distraction that once helped them stay comfortable. Before, they could focus on your reaction, they could track your effort, they could keep the attention on what you were doing. Now there is nothing to manage outside of themselves, and when there is no outside movement, the mind turns inward. Questions begin to appear, and they do not go away easily. Why didn't you reach out this time? Why does your absence feel louder than expected? Why does this feel unfinished? Why do they keep checking what is no longer arriving? Silence changes your position without one direct confrontation. You stop being easy to read. You stop being predictable. You stop playing the role they counted on you to play. That shift matters, because when they can no longer assume your next move, they also lose the comfort of believing they understand the connection. And here is the part most people miss. Real silence works because it is not a trick. It comes from stepping back for real. It comes from choosing peace over pursuit. They can feel the difference. They know when someone is quietly waiting for a reaction, and they know when someone has started to let go. The power changes the moment the chasing stops, but not in some loud or theatrical way. It changes softly, almost invisibly, because emotional power is rarely about who speaks the most. It is about who is depending on whom for movement. When you are always reaching, explaining, fixing, and trying to pull closeness out of distance, your energy is flowing outward. The center is no longer in you. It has been placed inside the other person. They become the one who answers when they want, withdraws when they want, returns when they want, and sets the pace while you live in reaction. Even if they are not doing it with cold intention, the structure still gives them that position. But when you stop feeding that structure, it falls apart. The energy no longer circles around them. It comes back to you. Your time comes back. Your attention comes back. Your emotional life comes back. And once that happens, the imbalance starts to weaken. For the avoidant, this can feel deeply unsettling. They were used to being the one who created distance and watched to see if you would close it. Your pursuit gave them quiet stability. When it disappears, they are no longer standing in passive power. If the connection is going to continue at all, they may have to move, and movement is exactly what their pattern resists. Keep listening, because this is where distance stops feeling safe and starts feeling expensive. Avoidance is often tied to one strong belief: distance feels safer than closeness. Not because they feel nothing, but because closeness wakes up feelings they do not know how to hold. Intimacy can feel like pressure. It can feel like exposure. It can feel like being seen too clearly. Distance, on the other hand, feels manageable. It lets them decide how much of themselves to show and when. In their world, stepping back may not feel like rejection. It may feel like self-protection. Somewhere in their past, closeness may have felt demanding, chaotic, or overwhelming. So they learned to regulate themselves by creating space. Over time, that response became automatic. They may tell themselves they are simply independent, that they need less, that being detached makes them strong. And because this strategy reduces immediate discomfort, they keep using it whenever emotions grow intense. But here is the hidden conflict. Even while seeking space, they still want connection. They want someone near enough to keep loneliness away, but far enough away that vulnerability never becomes unavoidable. That is why they often rely on the other person to keep the bond alive. Your effort let them stay connected without stepping fully into emotional risk. But the moment you stop carrying the bridge alone, the whole equation changes. The distance they once controlled starts becoming real separation. And real separation does not feel safe. It feels like possible loss. That is when curiosity begins to wake up. Not always longing at first, not always regret, often just curiosity. A gap has appeared in the pattern, and the human mind hates unexplained gaps. When someone has been consistently present, emotionally available, and easy to reach, their presence can become familiar in a dangerous way. It starts to feel permanent. It starts to feel guaranteed. The avoidant may not fully honor it, but they grow used to it. They expect the connection to remain alive because you kept giving it life. So when that presence suddenly disappears, the brain notices. It starts asking questions. Why did you stop? What changed? Are you hurt or are you done? Are you still there emotionally, or have you already turned the page? This curiosity matters because it is self-created. No one forced it. No one lectured them into reflection. Silence gave them no answer, no reassurance, no clear signal to read. And without those old signals, their usual assumptions stop working. Before, they may have believed you would stay, no matter how much space they created. That belief allowed them to stay distant without much urgency. But uncertainty sharpens attention. It makes your absence more noticeable than your presence once was. That is why silence can become so powerful. It creates room for their own thoughts to grow louder, and once those thoughts begin, they can become harder and harder to ignore. There is also the part the ego hates to admit. Even someone who acts detached can still want to feel chosen. They may never say it. They may never ask directly, but beneath the cool surface, there is often a quiet desire to feel significant in your world. Your pursuit gave them that feeling. Every message, every check-in, every attempt to reconnect told them the same thing in different forms. You matter. You still have an effect. You are not easy to replace. This becomes a subtle source of validation. They do not have to risk much to receive it. Your effort supplies the proof. In that way, pursuit can become a replacement for true emotional openness. The connection keeps going because one person keeps pushing it forward. The avoidant receives the attention without giving equal vulnerability in return. Over time, this can make distance feel consequence-free. The ego grows comfortable. It starts believing the arrangement will stay exactly as it is. Then you stop, and suddenly the supply is cut off. There are no regular signs confirming their place in your life, no easy reassurance, no emotional spotlight. That absence does not feel neutral. It feels like a drop, a loss, a disruption. Now they have to face a hard question. If they still want that sense of importance, are they willing to move toward real connection instead of waiting for it to come to them? That is the moment the old pattern begins to expose itself. Silence creates tension because it removes all the signals that normally keep a connection easy to read. Most interactions come with constant orientation points, messages, reactions, explanations. Even conflict gives structure. At least conflict says something. At least conflict shows there is still movement. But silence leaves open space, and open space makes the mind work. For the avoidant, this can feel especially intense because they are used to managing distance while still having access to your energy. Your replies, even short ones, acted like anchors. They confirmed that the bond still existed somewhere beneath the distance. Once those anchors disappear, the absence starts to feel charged. The mind searches for meaning. Maybe you are angry. Maybe you are healing. Maybe you have moved on. Maybe someone else now holds the emotional place they assumed would remain open for them. Each possibility creates a different reaction, but none brings certainty, so the tension stays alive. And because there is nothing external to fix or respond to, the process turns inward. This is where reflection begins. Not because they planned it, not because they suddenly became emotionally brave. It begins because there is nowhere else for the mind to go. They replay conversations, they rethink moments, they revisit the connection from angles they ignored before. And when reflection grows in silence, it can carry more weight than anything said during the heat of emotion. Stay with this because the next layer goes even deeper. What starts to surface now is often something they spent a long time pushing down: attachment. Suppressing a feeling does not erase it. It only pushes it below the level of easy awareness. As long as the connection existed without demanding too much closeness, they could keep that attachment under control. They could call it casual, undefined, manageable. They could downplay what it meant because your steady presence kept the connection alive without requiring them to step forward. In a strange way, your effort acted like a buffer between them and their own heart. But when your presence pulls back, the buffer disappears. Now, whatever remains has to be faced internally. This does not always arrive as some dramatic emotional revelation. Often it begins quietly. They think of you more often than expected. They notice the silence at odd times. They feel your absence in moments that used to feel ordinary. A small pull appears, then grows, and this creates conflict. One side of them wants to stay in the old pattern, self-contained, distant, protected. Another side starts recognizing that the connection carried more meaning than they let themselves admit. These two forces do not live easily together. The more they try to dismiss what they feel, the more persistent it can become, because what is ignored for too long often returns with more pressure, not less. That is why silence can bring buried attachment to the surface without a single word being spoken. And when access is no longer guaranteed, value becomes clearer. This happens in many parts of life, but it becomes painfully visible in relationships. When someone is always there, always responsive, always emotionally invested, their presence can begin to blend into the background, not because it is unimportant, but because the mind adjusts quickly to what feels stable. The avoidant may rely on that stability without fully seeing it. Your care becomes expected. Your consistency becomes normal. There is no urgency to question what you mean because nothing seems at risk. That false sense of permanence creates emotional laziness. They can delay, disappear, keep things unclear, and still assume the bond will be there. But when your availability is no longer certain, that assumption collapses. Suddenly the mind pays closer attention. What was once constant becomes uncertain, and uncertainty sharpens perception. They may begin replaying what you brought into their life. Your steadiness, your warmth, your effort, your emotional presence. Things that once looked ordinary now stand out because they are no longer guaranteed. This recognition does not always arrive with dramatic regret. Sometimes it comes as a quieter pain, a late understanding that something meaningful was present and never fully acknowledged while it was within reach, and that late understanding can linger far longer than either person expected. But this story is not only about what happens inside them, it is also about what happens inside you when you finally stop running after what keeps running from you. At first, silence can feel brutal. You may mistake stillness for loss. You may feel the urge to break it just to end the tension in your own chest. That urge is real. It comes from attachment, from hope, from habit, from all the places inside you that still want the old ending. But if you stay with yourself long enough, something powerful begins to happen. Your attention slowly detaches from their every movement. You stop measuring your worth by response time, mixed signals, and emotional crumbs. You begin to see the connection more clearly, not through longing, but through truth. You notice how much energy was leaving your life just to keep a fragile pattern alive. You notice how often you abandoned your own peace to remain emotionally available for someone who stayed half present. And this is the deeper shift. Silence is not just something they feel, it becomes something that gives you your center back. It lets you hear your own mind again. It lets your nervous system stop living in wait mode. It gives you space to ask a different question, maybe the most important one of all. If I have to keep chasing for love to exist, is it really love I am holding, or just fear of letting go? That question changes everything, because once you ask it honestly, the dynamic starts losing its spell. You begin to understand that not every unreachable person is mysterious, and not every difficult connection is deep. Sometimes confusion is not chemistry, sometimes intensity is not intimacy, sometimes the bond feels powerful only because one person is doing all the emotional labor required to keep it alive. And when that truth lands, your silence stops being a tactic and becomes a boundary, a clean one, a dignified one. You are no longer trying to make them feel your absence, so they return. You are allowing reality to reveal itself. If they care and are capable of meeting the moment, they will move. If they do not, the silence will show that too. Either way, you stop living in illusion, and this is why silence, when it comes from self-respect, is so transformative. It is not about control, it is about clarity. It strips the connection down to what is actually there once your effort is removed from the equation. And that truth can be painful, but it is also freeing, because no matter what they choose next, you are no longer trapped inside the same exhausting cycle. You are finally standing where your energy can belong to you first. If this is hitting hard, stay with me, because the last part is where the lesson becomes impossible to forget. Sometimes the avoidant does come back. Sometimes the silence grows heavy enough that they reach out, test the door, or try to re-enter the space they assumed would stay open. But this is where many people lose themselves again. They mistake return for transformation. They confuse curiosity with readiness. They see movement and assume healing has happened. Not always. A person can miss your presence and still remain loyal to the same pattern. They can feel the loss and still fear the vulnerability required to love well. That is why your next step matters. If they return, do not read only their words. Read their willingness. Read their consistency. Read whether they can stay present when things become emotionally real. Read whether they are building something mutual or simply reaching for the comfort your presence once gave them. Because the goal is not just to be wanted again. The goal is to be met, to be chosen with action, to no longer carry a connection alone while calling it love. Your silence taught you something sacred. Your value does not rise when they finally notice it. Your value was always there. Silence only removed the noise long enough for everyone to see it, including you. And once you truly see it, you stop begging for places where your soul has to shrink to fit. So in the end, silence is not revenge, it is revelation. It shows who was sustaining the bond. It shows what the other person does when your effort is no longer doing the work for both of you. It shows whether distance was truly peace for them or simply a shelter built on your constant return. And maybe most importantly, it shows you what happens when you stop abandoning yourself in the hope of being kept. The person who thought you would beg may indeed feel the shift. They may feel exposed, they may feel curious, they may even feel the weight of everything they never faced while you were still there, making the connection easy. But your real victory is not found in what they feel. It is found in what you no longer have to do. No more chasing, no more proving, no more bleeding for basic clarity. You chose stillness, and that stillness began to tell the truth. If they move toward that truth with openness and courage, then something real may begin. If they do not, the silence still gave you a gift. It ended the illusion and returned you to yourself. And once a person truly returns to themselves, they stop begging at locked doors. They walk forward, calm, clear, different, and that is the moment everything really changes.